If every map vanished tonight, could you sing your way home? Settle in and breathe slowly as we follow maps you can hear. Songlines that guided travelers across deserts, rivers, and starlit horizons long before paper or screens. As you get comfortable, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing our little map of viewers grow. Now let your eyes grow heavy and listen. The land is about to sing. Imagine learning a landscape the way you learn a favorite melody. By repetition, by feeling the rises and falls, by letting the words and tune settle so deeply that your body remembers them even when the mind grows tired. A songline is exactly that, a living oral map carried in verses that describe a route across country, linking one waterhole to the next, one ridge to a pass, one cluster of trees to a bend in the river. In many Aboriginal Australian traditions, these songs do not merely point the way, they weave the land, the ancestors, and the traveler into one continuous story. To sing a path is to move through it with attention. To walk a path is to keep the song alive. What might look like a simple travel tune to an outsider is, to its custodians, lore, memory, kinship, and geography sung as one. Think of the structure as a chain of verses, each verse anchoring a specific place. The lyrics mention a feature, perhaps a red bluff that leans like a sleeping kangaroo, or a creek that laughs twice before it disappears. Phrases that help you recognize the landmark on sight. The order of verses is the order of travel. When the song says, "Turn where the sleeping kangaroo meets the laughing water," you already know you are nearing the mouth of the creek, and your feet begin to angle toward it almost by themselves. Rhythm, too, is part of the code. A steady walking beat carries you over long flats. A quickened pulse whispers that the next segment is shorter than the last. A drawn-out phrase suggests a climb, breath stretching to match the slope. Over time, the melody becomes a metronome for distance and a compass for direction, so that when you hum it softly, you can feel whether you are ahead of the verse or behind it, drifting off course or right on track. Language inside these songs does double and triple duty. Names of places often contain mini descriptions. Color, shape, a plant that thrives only there, a behavior of water after rain, and those clues turn into checklists you can run as you walk. Metaphor is not decoration, but memory technology, because what is vivid sticks. Repetition is deliberate. A refrain may return whenever you pass a certain kind of shelter or a reliable soak tank, so the chorus itself becomes a symbol for safety. Call and response passages can mark junctions, routes where two lines cross or diverge, the second voice alerting you to choose left or right. Even the sound shapes of words can help. Sharp consonants for rocky country, soft liquid sounds for the wetlands, a playful line when the path winds and coils like a snake. Layer on top of that the feel of the ground underfoot, the wind direction on your cheek, the smell of particular trees at a certain season, and the song becomes multi-sensory, heard, spoken, trodden, breathed. Crucially, a songline is not a public playlist to grab at will. Custodianship matters. Different stretches of a route belong to different groups or families to teach, maintain, and perform. Some verses are open for many to hear, others are restricted, taught only at the right time of life, under guidance, within ceremony. That social fabric is part of the map's accuracy and care. Knowing who may sing which sections also tells you who to ask for permission to travel, where to rest, and how to behave at sensitive places. The line of song is thus also a line of relationship, threading communities along its path, so that navigation is never just getting from A to B, but moving respectfully through a network of obligations and reciprocity. Because the songs are learned in motion, the body itself becomes an instrument of memory. Steps match the beat. A pause in the verse is a pause to look. A hand gesture might point to a far-off target, while the words reference a nearby cue. That coupling of movement, sound, and sight supercharges recall. You remember a verse not just by the lyrics, but by what your calves felt when the hills steepened, by the way the horizon broke at the top, by the scent that drifted from a stand of wattles. If a verse describes two stones that watch each other, your eyes will seek that little gate of rocks as you crest the rise, and the satisfaction of recognition cements the memory for next time. This is why you can carry a map inside your breath, even when the night is overcast, or the ground has changed a little, or you are tired. The route lives as a sequence of embodied cues, each cue singing the next into place. The songs are also stories, often tracing the journeys of ancestral beings whose actions shaped the terrain. These are not mere backstories, but the framework that gives meaning and continuity to the route. When you sing that a great being lay down and became a mountain range, the contour before you is no longer an anonymous wall of rock. It is a known presence with a name, qualities, and responsibilities. Story furnishes memory with emotional hooks. It turns left at the ridge into follow where the ancestor turned his head to listen. And that change makes remembering easier, richer, and more anchored. Law and ethics can be carried the same way. A verse that advises not to take water from a delicate spring at the wrong season protects the spring, preserves a resource, and locates the advice in a narrative that sticks. The map, then, is moral as well as spatial, instructing both the way to go and the way to live while going. Because tune and pace are so central, songlines flex across scales. A single long melody might span hundreds of kilometers, with local variations that arise naturally as different custodians teach their sections. At a smaller scale, short songs tie together micro-routes within camp country, where to gather certain foods, where shade lasts longest at noon, where firewood is sparse and must be conserved. A traveler can stitch these together as needed, moving from one song to the next, always with the assurance that the verse you are singing has been sung by many before you, tested against weather and time. Variations are not errors, but living adjustments. New environmental details, small shifts in wording, a change in tempo that more faithfully matches the ground. The continuity resides in shared structure, in the order of places and the web of relationships that holds them. Night does not silence the map, it adds a second stave. Celestial patterns work in harmony with terrestrial cues. A verse may reference the rising of a familiar constellation to confirm the season or the time to set out, while the inclination of the Milky Way hints at direction during a long, flat crossing. The same story that explains a ridge by day may describe a star path by night, so that the sky becomes another page of the map to read, turning your face upward for confirmation before your feet press forward again. In a good season, you might hear frogs at a certain verse and know that the nearby soaks are full. In a dry season, the absence of that sound leads you to a backup route encoded in the song's alternate line. The map is adaptive because the song is alive. It helps to notice that what we call a map here is not an abstract grid with coordinates, but a relational way of knowing, where places are defined by their connections. This hill to that waterhole, this story to that clan, this star to that bend in the river. The power lies in sequence and association rather than in a bird's eye drawing. For someone trained in this system, the land is already annotated, and voice is the pen. Singing while you walk keeps the annotations fresh. Teaching them to the next generation keeps the map updated as conditions change. If flood alters a channel, the next version of the verse will say so, and the tune bends slightly to accommodate the new cadence of the ground. The technology here is not fragile ink or a battery, but a community rehearsing memory together, again and again, across years. Respect also means acknowledging limits. Not every detail belongs in a public account, and not every line should be generalized. Some knowledge is restricted to particular people for reasons of cultural safety and responsibility. Yet even from outside, one can appreciate the elegance of the method. Geography stored as narrative, direction held in rhythm, distance sensed in breath, and care for place woven into the act of travel. When you listen with this in mind, the idea of maps you can hear stops being mysterious and starts feeling practical and humane, a way of knowing that fits the body as easily as a favorite tune. You can picture a traveler at dawn, setting out softly so as not to wake the camp, murmuring the first lines that name a tree line and a shadowed gully, checking the slope with the tilt of their voice, feeling the track underfoot match the pattern in the song, noticing a familiar boulder newly split by a storm, and adjusting the phrase to note the change. Behind them is an elder's voice from the season before, and ahead of them are younger voices that will carry the route after, and the line between all of them is not a pencil, but a melody that keeps unfolding. If you imagine closing your eyes at that moment, you would still know where to put your next step, because the next verse is already waiting in your chest, asking to be sung. To sing the landscape is to let memory ride on sound until place and melody can't be told apart. A tune can slope like a hillside, flatten into a plain, or break into quick steps where the ground grows stony. And those shapes in the music help the mind recall what the eyes will meet. The voice is not simply describing, it is tracing. A rising phrase hints at a climb. A gentle fall suggests a descent toward a creek bed. A long-held note stretches across a salt flat, where distance is deceptive. When the song touches a cadence that feels like home, your feet often arrive at a campsite that has welcomed travelers for generations, and the harmony of arrival makes the memories stick deeper for next time. Rhythm is where direction becomes practical. A steady walking beat kept by soft footfalls or the tap of a stick lets each bar stand for a predictable span of ground. Slow, even pulses might map a broad valley floor, while a tightened, almost trotting beat could indicate a short passage between two distinct markers. If the rhythm inserts a deliberate rest, a breath-length pause, it may cue a stop to look, to check the line of a distant hill or the shape of a gum in a saddle. Over many journeys, the body learns the timing so that 3 verses mean roughly this far before the next water. And when you reach the chorus too soon, you know you have drifted and must correct while the melody still holds open the path. Within the lyrics, sound paints the scene as much as meaning does. Words for rocky country lean on crisp consonants that strike like pebble on pebble. Words for wetlands slide with liquids and long vowels, easy on the tongue, easing the pace. Onomatopoeia is a compass too. A repeated splash syllable may accompany a ford. A soft sibilance might recall wind through spinifex on a particular ridge. And a click of the tongue can mark a sudden turn at a fork. Alliteration packs landmarks into memorable bundles, bent bank, black bark, so that a listener can match the chant to the world without a notebook, eyes and ears checking each other as the track unfolds. Melody can carry a second message layered atop the words. Some communities keep a motif, 2 or 3 notes, that stands for a category of place. A low oscillation for permanent water, a bright upward skip for a lookout, a minor curl for a sacred no-go zone unless properly invited. When that motif surfaces, even tucked inside a longer tune, the body prepares for what belongs there. Waterskin ready, voice lowered, posture attentive. Through repetition, those motifs become like icons on an invisible map, instantly legible to those who have walked and sung the line many times. Call and response structures do more than sound beautiful. They are navigational handshakes. One voice names the approach, the answering voice names the decision point. Follow the red shoulder, calls the leader, and the group answers. Turn where the creek laughs twice, which is how the locals describe that double bend and ripple, a detail easy to verify when you arrive. In large, featureless stretches, a drone note, a continuous hum, can stand for the horizon itself, a tonal north against which movement is measured, while small melodic departures cue subtle course corrections without breaking the flow of travel. Singing the landscape is also a full-body practice. Gestures sketch what the voice names. A hand cuts downward to indicate a gully that cannot be seen until the last moment. Fingers ripple for reed beds. A palm fans wide for an open clay pan where tracks vanish. Steps may exaggerate a gradient during teaching, so a learner feels the slope in their calves as the melody rises. Sometimes the group will rehearse seated, letting hands tap the rhythm and eyes trace the air where the hills would be, training attention so that when the tune is sounded on country, recognition comes fast and calm. The songs carry safeguards built into their form. Verses often contain check phrases, small verifiable facts that function like a memory checksum. The color of a stone seam, the direction of afternoon shade on a hot month, the number of strides between two trunks of a landmark tree. If the check fails, if the stone is the wrong color, the shade not where it should be, you know the map you are holding in your throat does not match the world beneath your feet, and you must slow down, ask, or wait for better light. Redundancy is intentional. Crucial places are named from multiple angles with different cues for different seasons, so that if flood has rearranged the channel or drought has silenced frogs, the melody still offers another handle to grasp. Because the land changes with time, the song changes too, carefully and openly within what is appropriate to share. A verse may be nudged to note that a once reliable soak now appears later in the season, or that a fallen tree has opened a new sightline toward a distinctive mesa. These are not casual edits. They are community updates, tested and retaught, so that the song remains a faithful companion rather than an old map out of date. Some sections have parallel lines, alternate phrasings maintained for different conditions, so that when clouds erase the stars or midday glare blows out detail, the singer can switch lines and keep the route coherent. Sound also reaches beyond sight. Echoes carry information about the shape of nearby ground, and singers learn how a clap or a call returns in certain gullies versus open ground. A verse may cue an echo test at a point where two similar paths diverge, and the right response, one echo, not two, quick, not slow, confirms the way. The nose adds its own chorus, specific scents, eucalypt resin, wet clay, the dust of a well-worn wallow, anchor lines in memory, and are sometimes hinted at in the words themselves, so that a phrase about sweet breath tells you to expect the blossom of a certain tree that blooms when the nearby soak is worth checking. Not all knowledge rides in the same register. Some lines are for everyone's safety, open, practical, frequently rehearsed across ages. Other lines hold story, lore, and ceremony that require guidance, permission, and the right moment to pass on. That distinction protects both people and places and preserves the integrity of the map. Even so, the underlying technique, the way melody bundles distance, the way rhythm mirrors walking, the way words carry landmarks, can be appreciated without prying into what is not ours to know. It is enough to see how a human voice can knit direction, memory, and care into something you can carry without weight, a guide that works in darkness and daylight, with company or alone. Teaching often begins with small loops, sung slowly and walked with many pauses. A learner repeats a short stretch until the beat of it settles in the bones, then adds the next stretch, like a new bead on a string. Later, segments are linked in longer chains, rehearsed at different times of day, in different seasons, and from both directions, so the line can be followed backwards if needed. In this way, the landscape becomes a familiar melody that you can start at many points, a tune that finds your place when you hum a few bars and feel where you are within its arc. There is a gentle humility to the practice because it takes its shape from the ground rather than imposing a grid upon it. The song does not insist that the land fit the music. The music listens first, then answers. Hills teach rises, rivers teach flow, and wind through grasses teaches a soft tremor at the edge of a phrase. To sing well is to pay attention, to move slowly enough to notice the little corrections the world offers. A frog beginning to call earlier in the year, a dune with a new lip after a storm, a stand of trees now shading the morning side rather than the afternoon because a trunk has fallen. The tune gathers these notes and makes them travel-sized, a memory you can breathe. In wide country, where landmarks are sparse, singers lean more on star cues interwoven with the ground song. The sound may brighten at the mention of a rising constellation that signals the right heading, then settle back to the earth line once the bearing is confirmed. Where the sky is hidden under heavy cloud or in dense forest, the song may carry micro-cues of slope underfoot and the pressure of air in a saddle that lets experienced walkers feel the land through their legs and lungs. Even silence has a role. A held quiet after a verse can mean listen, an invitation to let the environment answer before the next line resumes. What emerges from all this is not merely a clever mnemonic, but a way of belonging. To sing a place into clarity is to accept its terms, to let it teach you how to move through it without waste, without harm, and with gratitude. The voice ensures that travel is never only mechanical progression, it is also a recital of connection, an affirmation that the path exists because of countless songs before yours and will continue because you are careful with the one you carry now. When the tune curls around your tongue at dawn and the ground answers with a shape you know, the line between memory and world dissolves, and you are simply going step by step, lyric by lyric, held by a map that meets you at the pace of your breath. Memory settles best when it has a rhythm to ride and a body to anchor it. When you walk and sing together, the beat in your feet and the breath in your chest become a timing device that parcels the world into steady pieces, each piece tied to a verse, each verse tied to a place. The path is learned not as an abstract line, but as a sequence of sensations, the length of a stride between two shrubs, the slight lean of the torso on a slope, the way your breathing lengthens across a flat and shortens when the ground rises. The song folds these sensations into its phrasing so that, later, humming the melody summons the feel of the land, and stepping onto the land brings the melody back to the tongue. This pairing, syllable with stride, note with view, turns recall into something you do with your whole frame, not just your head. Walking creates a natural metronome that keeps repetition from blurring into monotony. Each time you pass a landmark while singing its line, you carve the association a little deeper. But because no two walks are identical, light shifts, wind turns, the angle of shadow changes, the repetition is varied enough to keep attention awake. Small differences act like the little barbs on a seed that help it stick. One day, the creek gurgles loudly, and the word in the verse that imitates its sound pops. Another day, it has only a thin runnel of water, and the same word feels quieter on the tongue, and your memory expands to hold both versions. Over many loops, the path becomes robust. You don't just know it in perfect conditions, you know its range. The motion of the body offers built-in checkpoints. A pause in the song prompts a pause in the legs to look for a distant cue. A quickened phrase encourages a short, precise traverse between two rocks. A drawn-out cadence lets you cross a bare patch where prints blow away. Even the micro-movements matter. A slight turn of the head to catch a profile of a hill. A raised chin to taste the wind direction. A softening of the knees before a sandy dip. These are not extra decorations, but parts of the memory itself. Later, if you can't recall a line, you can sometimes trigger it by reproducing the gesture you learned with it, as if the arm knew before the mouth remembered. In this way, the trail lives in muscle and tendon as much as in words. Teaching on the move follows a patient spiral. A learner walks a short span, singing in the wake of a more experienced voice, then turns and walks it back, singing first and listening second, then repeats in a different light, then once again in the other direction. Backward learning is a powerful test. If the sequence clicks even when reversed, you have more than a string of spots. You have a flexible sense of the route. Pacing is adjusted by the teacher not only to match the walker's strength, but to match the attention they can carry without strain. The goal is not speed, but saturation, letting each verse soak long enough that the next time the footfalls find the beat, the memory steps out to meet them. There are subtle ways of marking progress that keep morale steady on long learning walks. A quiet refrain may return after each successful recognition, a soft yes inside the song that rewards correct seeing. When attention fades, the guide might switch to a livelier line that carries a hint of play, because play brightens memory and shakes off tiredness. Rest points are often the same places where the song rests, so that sitting and sipping water links forever with a shaded outcrop and a certain chord. And later, even passing by, your body feels the urge to slow there, the pause and the tune reinforcing each other without conscious plan. Memory in motion is social memory too. 2 or 3 voices moving together hear errors quickly and correct them gently. If someone leans into the chorus a half beat early, the others hover on the held note, and the dissonance signals a drift in timing that might reflect a drift of the invisible line. A child's high echo layered on an elder's steady tone makes the route audible across ages, and the cadence bends to make room for everyone's breath. Responsibility flows along the path with the song. The one who knows this stretch leads here. At the next bend, another takes the front because their family holds that verse. Leadership thus rotates with the land, and the act of remembering is shared, preventing the map from shrinking to a single voice. The environment supplies a second chorus that, once learned, will not be ignored. Underfoot textures tap messages into the soles. Grit announcing a change in rock. Springy spinifex warning of a shallow root mat. slick clay signaling care after rain. Shoulders register wind with a subtle push that can be read like a compass when the view is hemmed in. Smells arrive before sights, and a verse may cue the nose to expect a certain resin or dampness, sharpening attention at just the right moment. When a line mentions the cold breath of a shaded gully at noon, the walker learns to notice the drop in temperature as a sign of being exactly where they should be. The body becomes a bundle of measuring instruments, tuned without gadgets by repeated, attentive travel. Because memory also ripens in rest, travel days are paired with quiet evenings where the line is sung softly again, not to move, but to settle. The warmth of the fire, the hush of shared time, the slow rocking of someone grinding seed or plaiting fiber, all of this gives the song a gentle frame in which to consolidate. Sleep afterward often brings a dream or a fragment of story from the day's path, another layer of stitching that holds the new learning in place. In the morning, the first steps feel more assured, as if the feet had been practicing in the night. When conditions change, motion keeps the memory adaptable. If flood lays different patterns in a creek bed, the next pass folds the new shapes into the phrasing. If fire opens a view and an old, distant cue becomes visible earlier on the approach, the timing of a line is nudged to signal that sooner sighting. Small revisions are tried, discussed, and then held if they prove true across seasons. New verses are not made lightly, and old ones are not discarded in haste. Instead, alternate lines may exist side by side for a while, like braided paths, and walkers learn when to take one and when the other. The practice is humble, because the teacher is the land itself, and even the finest memory must be willing to listen again. Tools, when used, are simple and serve memory rather than replace it. A carving on a stick might hold the order of key places as a teaching aid for beginners. A knot in a belt might remind a traveler of a promised stop or a sensitive site to treat with special care. These are prompts, not crutches, and they work because they are tied to walking and singing, not kept apart in a pocket. Even the way provisions are packed, heavy to light, specific foods for specific stretches, can become part of the route's rhythm, aligning appetite and load with the segments of the song so that the body notices when a mistake has been made before the mind does. Learning to correct on the move is its own art. If you reach a verse that calls for a view you cannot find, you do not panic. You lengthen the phrase, slow the feet, and look for the last thing you are sure of. Then return to it and feel the sequence lock again. The song does not scold, it guides, expecting small errors and providing soft ways to notice and fix them. A useful habit is to hum a bar or two ahead under the breath, like checking the next bend in a creek with a glance from the bank. If what you see refuses to match the preview, you know early and adjust gently rather than after a long, tiring detour. Children often begin by keeping time, while others sing, clapping softly or tapping a stick, learning the length of segments in their bodies before they must hold the words. They are allowed to wander a little left or right where it is safe, discovering for themselves how the view shifts and how the song's cues feel from different angles, so that later, when a path must be found across unfamiliar ground. They have a library of variations already in their legs. Adolescents may be asked to lead short stretches, discovering the weight that comes with setting the pace and choosing where to place a rest, feeling the community's trust and correcting attention before it blurs. The most persuasive proof that motion makes memory strong is how it endures through loud seasons of life. Years can pass, and then a person will step onto a route they learned as a child, sing a line they have not sung in a long time, and find that their feet align as if a magnet had turned inside them. The old pauses return in the same places. The same urge to look left arises at the same moment. The soft dip in the ground presents itself under the same held note. Not because the path is frozen, but because the way of learning braided the land into breath and stride, and that braid holds fast even when the mind is busy or tired. There is also a kindness in the way moving memory shares the load. No one person must carry the entire line alone. Across a long walk, leadership can pass with the terrain, and when someone falters, another voice picks up the phrase so the group's confidence never collapses. A traveler who is new to a stretch might be given the middle position, hearing the line from both sides, supported by the footsteps ahead and behind. The design makes forgetting unlikely, not because people are perfect, but because the practice expects imperfection and wraps it in redundancy, rhythm, and care. In tight country, where the path weaves through dense growth, memory rides on smaller signals. A certain route across the track is felt rather than seen and has a nickname in the verse. A thin thread of light at midday marks a gap in the canopy and puts a bright vowel on the tongue. A bend in the creek smells of crushed mint, and the word for that smell lives exactly there in the song. Move slowly enough, and these details become as dependable as distant hills in open land. The walker learns to let the fine-grained rhythm of steps, short, long over the roots, carry the recollection forward like a small drum pattern that cannot be misunderstood. Even silence is part of the method, parceled like a precious resource. Lengthened rests in the line are not emptiness, but invitations to listen outward and let the world reply. If the expected frog chorus is missing in a wet season, the silence itself becomes information, and an alternate line is chosen that skirts a place under stress. If a breeze brings a new smell too early, the group may hold the pause longer to confirm, then adjust the sequence without breaking the calm. Movement allows for this agility. Standing still too long makes the memory stale, but walking with attention lets the landscape's current voice enter the song. And so the map remains more than an idea. It is a practice that lives in the way a body moves through space, in the timing of breaths, in the feel of ground and the weight of a pack, in 100 small cues that only appear when you are out there, going, each step a syllable and each syllable a step, the two twined until they are indistinguishable and dependable, a quiet braid that holds fast even when the track fades and the light grows thin. Songlines live because people care for them, and that care is organized, deliberate, and ceremonial. Custodianship is not ownership in the sense of possession. It is a standing responsibility, a promise to sing the land correctly, to keep the verses healthy, to teach them in the right order to the right people at the right time. A family, a clan, or a set of kin-linked groups may hold guardianship over a stretch, and within that stretch, different individuals carry different burdens. Some voices lead the public parts, some hold restricted sections that require initiation. Some keep the rhythm and the beat. Some tend the stories that explain why this bend in the river matters to lore and why a rock must not be moved. These roles are not interchangeable or casually swapped. They are embedded in kinship systems that map relationships between people as carefully as the song maps the ground. Ceremony is where the line's pulse is checked and renewed. To perform a songline in ceremony is to tune it to country, to the season, and to the community that will rely on it. There is a careful sequence to prepare. Ground is cleared. Sacred objects are handled with protocols. Bodies are painted or marked in ways that echo the places the song will touch, and elders confer quietly to confirm what will be sung and by whom. The performance is not entertainment. It is maintenance, like oiling a tool or repairing a shelter before rain. Voices lift, and with them the obligations of care are repeated, so that the memory is not only clear, but clean, free of mistakes that would send a traveler astray, free of neglect that would let a rule about water use or fire management fade. Permission sits at the doorway of every line. To walk along a route you do not hold, you ask, and asking is itself a ritual of respect, gifts, the right words, the presence of someone recognized by both sides, a shared meal that signals friendly intent. When permission is granted, it often comes with guidance about where to camp, what places to avoid, how to behave in stretches that carry particular stories, and how to sing certain verses softly or not at all. The exchange is reciprocal. Visitors bring news, trade goods, and fresh eyes to spot changes that locals may have missed. Custodians open the path and in so doing keep it alive as a connector of peoples rather than a private thread. The path is a line of relationships, and ceremony is how those relationships remain clear and usable. Care for country shows up in practical acts that are folded into ceremonial life. A waterhole is cleaned of debris, but not at any time. At the time specified by tradition, when disturbing it will do least harm to animal breeding or to the plants that shade and protect it. Paths are lightly repaired after flood, not by carving a new track harshly through vulnerable areas, but by placing steps and choosing a contour that matches what the land offers that season. Fire is applied with knowledge, small cool burns in the right months that reduce the risk of catastrophic fire later and encourage certain foods to flourish. Plant gathering follows rules encoded in story and confirmed in ceremony. Take first from here, leave these to seed. Never strip a long stretch bare. Harvest enough for the group and enough for the next travelers who will come later, and sing thanks before you leave. In this way, the ethics of travel are not lectured as abstractions. They are rehearsed as part of the songs and practiced during ceremonial gatherings until they feel as natural as breath. Custodianship also manages knowledge boundaries. Some verses are public, designed to teach children and to guide anyone safely through common ground. Other verses hold sacred narratives, gendered knowledge, or lore that must be carried by those who have undergone certain stages of learning. Initiation is not a one-time event, but a ladder of responsibilities, each rung adding detail and consequence. Ceremony marks these steps. A person is entrusted with a new section, corrected in their pronunciation or timing, instructed in the gesture that must accompany a line, reminded why a particular place demands silence or averted eyes. The restrictions protect not only content, but context, ensuring that story and instruction remain stitched to their proper supports so that meaning and safety are preserved. When ceremony gathers groups along a line, the song becomes diplomacy. People meet at agreed sites, often places of abundance and open ground, and exchange verses, dance pieces, and news. Disputes can be aired and settled within the framework of law that the song itself carries. Agreements and marriages may be arranged. Trade flows along the same channels as the music, with objects moving in one direction and stories moving in the other. The effect is to make the line more than a corridor. It is a living artery where cultural circulation happens. Each meeting imprints new layers of context onto existing memory, so that the verse that mentions a certain bluff may now also carry the recollection that here two families reconciled, or that here an old rule was clarified in a drought, or that here a new child received their name. And those memories add weight to the care taken when passing again. For children, ceremony is a school without walls. They watch how elders prepare. They feel the shift in attention when a sacred object is unwrapped. They learn to wait for a cue before speaking. And they see that knowledge sits inside relationships rather than being pulled out of a shelf at will. Their first contributions are small, keeping time with sticks, carrying water, mimicking gestures, and each is honored because it connects their bodies to the communal rhythm. In time, they try a line under supervision, and the community listens as intently to a child's clear attempt as to an elder's polished delivery, not to flatter, but because the future of the map will rely on that small, steady voice finding its place. Ceremony protects against error by building in layers of memory checking. Multiple custodians know the same stretch from slightly different angles. One holds the primary narrative. Another holds a parallel line used in a different season. Another remembers the lore embedded in the root. When a verse is performed, others listen with full attention, ready to nudge a word back into place or to confirm a change if the land has shifted. The correction is gentle but firm because accuracy is care. A missung direction can cost time or safety. A misremembered rule can harm a water source or a plant stand. The tone is not punitive, but serious. Responsibility is shared and taken as a sign of respect for the ancestors who first set these lines in motion. The ethics of moving through sensitive sites are taught ceremonially because ordinary instruction would be too weak to hold in moments of stress. If a place is a burial ground, a route may skirt it, and a verse may indicate the respectful distance with a phrase that lowers the voice and slows the pace. If a spring is precarious, the law might require that only certain people draw water first, that others wait, that words of thanks be spoken quietly after, and that all depart without lingering. These protocols are not arbitrary. They hold ecological and social intelligence gathered over long spans, and ceremony keeps the reasons alive even when not explicitly stated, because the weight of communal attention makes forgetting unlikely. Gendered knowledge and age-based roles are part of this fabric, and ceremony is the loom. There are times when only women lead a section, when only men handle an object, when seniors speak and juniors listen, and also when roles intersect so that everyone learns their dependence on one another. Outsiders often ask why, but within the system, the pattern is the answer. Work is distributed to safeguard both information and people, and the arrangement is ratified through generations because it keeps the land and the community whole. This is not static. Elders, in consultation, may adapt specific practices to new circumstances while maintaining the integrity of law, and those adaptations are anchored by performing them in ceremony so they are not mistaken for casual innovations. Even silence is ceremonial. There are moments when the right thing to do is to say nothing, to stand and let the wind and birds speak, to allow a place to rest. Silence in a performance can indicate the presence of something too potent to name casually, or it can be a respectful acknowledgement of an absence, a species gone quiet this season, a person who once led a verse and has passed away. The pause carries meaning not as a lack, but as a full gesture, and it teaches restraint as a form of care, just as crucial as the impulse to sing. The repair of a line after disruption is conducted with ceremony because healing requires attention and agreement. If a flood alters a channel and makes an old approach unsafe, guardians gather, walk the place slowly, test alternative paths, and then sing the chosen correction together so that it becomes the new shared truth. If a fire has scorched trees that once served as landmarks, a new metaphor is chosen, perhaps a charred branch that now points like a finger, and fixed in the verse. When roads or fences cut through territory, pathways may be rerouted to keep people safe, while preserving as much continuity as possible. And the revised protocol is taught so that travelers know where to cross and how to signal intent. The song's strength is its ability to carry these respectful changes without breaking, and ceremony is the means by which the braid is retied. Care also extends to the relationships that sustain travel across different groups. A traveler who arrives with the appropriate go-betweens and signs of respect is greeted, given a place to rest, and oriented to local conditions. In return, they share what they know of the line beyond. Whether a soak is low or a stand of yams is plentiful downriver, whether a patch of spinifex has been burned or left, whether a certain story has been performed recently. This exchange keeps the broader network resilient. The songline is not a single river, but a confluence, and the currents that feed it remain clear because people upstream and downstream treat information as a shared resource rather than a private hoard. Law travels with the line and is renewed in its recitation. Rules about who may marry whom, about the resolution of disputes, about compensation for harm done, about hospitality and safe passage are embedded in story that is retold at the points where it is most relevant. A bluff that bears a tale of conflict settled by a gift teaches that gifts mend. A grove that shelters a narrative about speaking truth teaches that certain words must be said in certain places so that they carry the weight of witness. Ceremony draws these lessons to the surface so that when they are needed in ordinary life, they are not vague ideals, but remembered practices attached to landforms and seasons. The aesthetic dimension of ceremony, dance, body paint, carved designs, the timbre of certain instruments, does not sit apart from navigation. It is a form of annotation. The patterns painted on a thigh may echo the ripple of a river reach. The step pattern of a dance may mirror the short, long over roots on a forested slope. The drone of a hollow log may recall the horizon's steady line across a salt pan. Beauty is not an extra, it is a mnemonic with emotional force, the kind of memory hook that endures when fatigue would erase a dry instruction. When people say a songline is sung, danced, and walked, they mean that the knowledge is braided tightly in sound, motion, and image, so all senses carry it. When outsiders ask to learn, the answer, if given, comes with boundaries held in ceremony. Public knowledge may be shared in guided contexts that emphasize respect and context, while restricted parts remain properly held by those to whom they belong. A good guest observes without pressing, gives more than they take, and understands that comprehension of the whole is not their right. This too is care for the integrity of law, care for the safety of places, care for the dignity of communities who have kept memory intact under pressure, and care for the future so that what is shared today does not cause harm tomorrow. Finally, ceremony acts as a calendar, aligning people with the cycles that make navigation meaningful. Certain lines are sung when particular flowers bloom, when a constellation stands in a doorway in the sky, when winds turn from one quarter to another, when animals begin to move with young. These timings are not arbitrary. They are instructions for when travel is safe, when resources can be taken without damage, when crossing a boundary will find friendly faces rather than empty camps. To keep the songline is to keep time with the earth, and ceremony is the clock that cannot run down, a human rhythm synchronized to the reliable changes in stars and seasons, so that care is not a drain but a steadiness, a way of moving through the world that leaves both the traveler and the track in good condition for whoever comes next. At night, the land gains a second map, and the sky becomes a page you can read. The arc of familiar stars, the tilt of the Milky Way, the slow turning around the dark hub of the south sky. These are not decorations, but directions, the kind you can hold even when the ground is dark and the wind rubs the trees into one long whisper. Star paths braid themselves into the songlines so that a traveler can confirm a heading with a glance upward, can time a departure by the rising of a particular cluster, can feel the season in the way a bright river of light crosses the zenith. To move under stars is to feel the Earth's rotation as a guide rather than a blind motion, and to know that if one landmark is hidden by night, 1,000 others have kindled above it to assist. The horizon is a ruler, and the stars are its numbers. A certain bright point climbs from the eastern edge at dusk in the cold months and announces that safe weather has settled for a long walk. Another skims low in the north and warns that winds will swing around by morning. The Milky Way makes a wide, pale road that at certain times of year leans like a bridge across two hills and, at other times, stands upright like the spine of a giant. Those tilts are not merely pretty, they are bearings. When the Milky Band lies along your left shoulder during early night, you know you are walking with a particular river at your right hand, even if the water cannot be heard yet. When it turns upright before midnight at a certain season, you know you are near the time to stop, to aim for a campsite sheltered from a wind that follows that posture. Stars do not sit, they wheel. Learning that wheel is learning time as well as place. You watch how a trio of stars rises in a long line, then rotates while you walk, so that after a set number of verses, they stand like a pointed hat above a dark gap in the ridge. If you are early, the hat is still tilted. If you are late, the hat has passed its peak and begun to sink. The sky thus becomes a clock you can carry without weight. In wide flats where night can feel empty, this clock steadies the spirit. You count the slow, clean clicks of constellations crossing invisible marks, and with each click, your steps match the timing your elders taught for the distance to water or to a known grove where the ground is safe to camp. Certain stars act as doorways, their first appearance before dawn in a given season, a soft breaking free from the horizon's haze, signals a shift in the year's work. Time to burn small country here, time to leave a nesting place undisturbed there, time to expect a fruit to ripen or a fish to run. These heliacal risings are part of the map because they tell you not just where to go, but when to go, aligning travel with cycles that reduce risk and ease strain. A traveler who knows the doorways can plan a long crossing so that a difficult patch falls under the part of the night when a helpful pattern hangs in front of them. Like a lantern carried by an ancestor, pace and patience grow around these predictable gates. You do not demand that the night hurry. You make your steps keep company with it. The moon is a companion with moods, and its use is gentle and clever rather than blunt. When bright, it floods the land with enough light to run long, safe stretches, but its glare can erase fainter stars, so routes that rely on star clusters are taught with care for dark moon nights. On those nights, the sky is a riot of detail, and the map is richest. A learner is walked where the ground is kind and the horizon clean, so they can anchor many points at once. When the moon is a thin bowl and sits low, its horns point roughly along a line that can be interpreted, but only if one also reads the land. No one rule runs ahead of attention. On moony nights, the color of shadows on pale sand can whisper slope and path. On black nights, the song leans more on the steady drift of star patterns and the feel of air pooling in low places, cold on the ankles, telling you a creek bed is near before your feet find it. In the south, where no single pole star fixes the sky, the center of turning is shown by a small rhythm of stars, and by the circle they trace night after night. Learning to see that circle is like learning the weight of your own head. At first awkward, then so familiar you cannot imagine not knowing. When you notice how certain stars never set, how they swing in ever-shifting posture around that dark hub, you gain a sense of south that cannot be shaken by cloud on one edge or by a silhouette of hills on the other. The hub is a patient teacher, and traveling beneath its steady rotation builds confidence in direction that daylight sometimes lacks when the sun is blinding or the horizon is busy with shapes. Planets are the wanderers, bright and useful if you know their habits. One may shine low before dawn and serve as a temporary beacon, pointing along a known line for a week or a month. Another may sit high in the evening like a nail holding the sky's cloth. Because they move differently from the fixed stars, their value is in short, well-taught windows. An elder will say, when that bright one sits above the fork between those two dark trees, we sleep one more time before the big bend, and for that season the line is sharper. Then the planet marches on, and the teaching shifts back to the more faithful slow drift of the star patterns. Understanding this keeps travelers from mistaking a useful visitor for a permanent road sign. Clouds do not erase the night map. They change which part of it you read. On a thinly veiled night, the brightest stars still press through and can confirm a bearing every half hour, like lifting the lid of a pot to check the stew. On thick nights, you tune into the earth's echoes and the breath of wind through certain gaps. Night breezes run along their own paths. A tongue of cool air may flow from a saddle you cannot see, but can feel against your face when you turn. Owls, frogs, and insects play a role too. In seasons when frogs sing at certain waterholes, their chorus at a distance is a sound star that you can follow. When they fall quiet, a different line, one that notes the hollowness of footfall on a root-crossed slope, takes the lead. This is why the sky is taught as part of a woven map, not a separate sheet. If one thread is hidden, the others hold. Teaching the night map is a craft. Beginners start with the obvious, a bright line of 3 stars that can be found even when nervous, a dust-white river that can be recognized in many tilts. The teacher will walk a short loop, timed so that the sky's rotation presents the same pattern in slightly different positions, pointing out how it slides, how this slide matches the angle of a spur you will travel by day. Later, learners are brought to places with clean horizons in all directions and asked to point where certain stars will rise in an hour. They sit, sing low, and watch their guests climb up, the correction gentle and exact. In time, they are asked to stand and walk by star cue alone for a few hundred paces, then check against a ground cue, then walk again, strengthening the braid between above and below. There is a kindness, too, in choosing sky anchors that are visible from many places within a region, not fragile local alignments that break the moment a ridge intervenes. Where the land offers such fragile sights, the songs say so and instruct a different set for that stretch. This redundancy keeps the night map resilient to the ordinary accidents of travel. Late departure, smoke haze, surprise storm. It also allows different families to maintain their own favored anchors without breaking the shared line. Learning each other's preferences at ceremonies makes cooperation easier when groups travel together. Stars also help with knowing how far you have gone when the land is deceptive. On a salt pan or a featureless plain, distances shrink and swell with the mood. Under a big sky, you can promise yourself to walk until a certain pattern has turned by a measured fraction. And if your feet ache before the time, the promise holds you steady. If you still feel fresh when the fraction finishes, the promise tells you to stop, because the track needs to keep its shape for tomorrow. These sky measures prevent the kind of overreaching that leads to poor decisions near the edge of strength or water. Seasonal star paths are the backbone for planning big moves across country. When a certain cluster lifts before dawn, it might be the call to begin walking riverward, because fish will be running and trade partners gathering. When another rules the evening, it might be a sign to turn inland before storms make a crossing dangerous. These are not single cues taken in isolation. Flowers, insects, and winds speak the same language, and the map is convincing when many voices agree. But the stars are reliable voices, and their speech is one you can still hear in a long drought, or after fire when ground signs are ash dark and confusing. Even the way you lie down to sleep can serve the night map. Elders may place a newbie's swag with their head toward the direction of tomorrow's first steps, so that when they wake in the night and look up, they begin to stitch the view overhead to the feel of getting up and going. Over many nights, this simple habit builds an easy compass in the bones, and an anxious walker finds calm in knowing that their body will rise already aimed. Respect shapes how the night map is shared. Not every story tied to the sky is for open telling, and not every name for a star is given outside of ceremony. But the practical instruction, how to feel the turning, how to check the tilt of the Milky Band, how to trust your own patience when waiting for a pattern to clear low cloud, can be taught plainly, because it keeps people safe and honors the land's generosity. In this way, night navigation remains what it has long been, a careful, beautiful discipline that makes darkness hospitable, that turns cold air into a teacher, and that sets a traveler moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that overhead an old, accurate story is being retold, slowly, all night long, and that their feet belong to it as surely as their eyes do. The songs carry food and water the way a basket carries seed, securely, with enough redundancy that a stumble will not spill everything. Verses name where to find reliable soaks after different rains, which side of a dune hides a shaded hollow that holds moisture longest, which creek bends leave pools when the surface dries, and how to read the skin of the water for depth and safety. A line might say, "The place where the wind forgets to touch the water," a cue for a sheltered pocket that resists evaporation, or the pool that blinks twice at noon, meaning a ripple pattern caused by an underwater spring. To protect fragile sources, the song sets rules inside the memory. Approach quietly, drink in order, scoop with hands, not feet, muddy water last, so the next traveler finds it clear. A refrain can even encode the direction to dig for a soak. 3 paces from the trunk on the afternoon side, where roots lead your fingers down. And the tempo of the refrain helps measure the distance, so the digging hand lands where the verse ends. Food knowledge rides alongside, never far from water in the melody. The songs list when certain yams swell in the ground, how to spot their vines among lookalikes, and how to harvest with a forked stick so that part of the plant remains to regenerate. A playful line about a lizard that laughs then runs can be a mnemonic for a species whose burrows angle a particular way, and the rhyme that follows about the sun kissing the tail tells you to set your snare with the tail toward the morning light. Seeds are named with the rhythm of their processing: tap, winnow, grind, and the rhythm carries the order of steps, so a sleepy traveler can still make good flour at day's end. Fruits are tied to star signs and winds, so that you learn to expect sweetness not by a calendar on paper, but by a calendar in the sky and on your skin, and the overlap of cues reduces the chance of arriving too early, stripping a tree that should have been left to ripen. The songs are careful about dangers that look like gifts. A bitter root with a delicious twin is given a harsh sound in the verse. A scraping consonant cluster that grates the tongue and makes the body suspicious. The safe one gets a smooth syllable that feels like a swallow of water. Instructions to detoxify certain foods are folded into story so they are remembered as law, not as optional steps. Soak this tuber for 2 nights until the water runs clear and your words run clear. Bake these seeds long enough for the shell to flake like old paint before you taste the heart. Animal behavior is catalogued in metaphors that stick. A bird that flies low and fast at dusk can signal nearby water or emerging insects. A sudden silence from frogs can warn of a predator or a shift in weather. A marching line of ants climbing a tree after long dryness may lead you to a pocket of moisture in a knot. The song ties these observations to places where they matter most, so that when you hear the cue, you are already where the knowledge helps. Shelter is taught as a collaboration between wind and ground. Verses hum lower when they approach a campsite likely to be calm overnight, naming a ridge that breaks the gusts, a line of shrubs that filters sand, a hollow that pools cold air you should avoid in winter but seek in summer. The melody lengthens when crossing open flats at late afternoon, carrying a reminder to collect fuel as you go, because firewood thins near good camps, and the refrain returns with a list of woods that spark too much or smoke green, and those that make clean coals for steady cooking. A different melodic motif signals watch for flood, paired with the story of a sleeping snake that wakes in heavy rain and sweeps through the low ground a way to warn against bedding in a creek bed that looks tempting under stars. Even the way to pitch a windbreak is sung, corner toward the breath of the night, tie at knee height, not waist height, leave a finger's width above the ground on the lee for the fire to breathe. And the tune makes the order easy to recall when fingers are cold. Crossings and edges receive special attention because mistakes there are costly. The songs describe how to test a river that runs slow but hides depth. Throw a stick, watch the curl on its nose, compare it to the curl in the verse. And how to read the small V's on the surface that reveals submerged logs and the long slick that betrays a deep channel. In marsh country, the lyrics teach the sound of safe ground under a probing stick, the hollow thud of false crust, the sweet shiver over a spongy mat that will hold only if you move lightly and spread your weight. On cliff country, a repeated phrase snaps like a warning about loose shale and instructs a zigzag descent that keeps falls short and manageable, binding the pattern to a song so you don't glide straight down and tumble. Where dunes run, the line tells you which slopes crust after wind and which crumble, how early shade points to firmer return tracks, and how to pace your climb so the crest surprises you gently instead of dumping you into a steep leeward slide. Animals as food are approached with ethics wrapped in prudence. The songs name seasons when taking certain creatures risks the next generation. Nesting birds, pregnant marsupials, fish heavy with roe, and swap to alternate foods in those times, so that hunger is met without breaking the cycle. Traps are described with detail that feels like dance steps, each move paired with a beat in the verse, so the hands move correctly even when the mind is tired. The proper thanks or gesture after a successful hunt is not simply piety. It is a reminder that taking today obliges care tomorrow, and that the next time you pass this way, you will leave more than you took, where the land is thin. By embedding restraint into the same memory channel that carries how, the songs make virtue practical and repeatable. Fire is a tool with songs for edges and seasons. A calm, low melody cues cool burns in the right months to clear old grass, open pathways, and encourage fresh growth that brings animals. A stern, staccato line warns about hot winds and tight gullies that can turn a small fire into a sprinting danger. Instructions about where to stand and how to watch the smoke are coded into performance. Arms out to feel the draft, face to the trickle of air holding a sh syllable. Feet placed on already blackened ground so you do not plant a new ignition. The verses name plants that prefer a touch of heat and those that must be spared, and they direct fire so it runs gently like a lace across country rather than a sheet that leaves nothing. These lines are rehearsed in ceremony and practiced in small work so that when a hazard arrives, the movements are available, not theoretical. Weather signs are set to melody because they are easy to miss when distracted. The songs note a keening wind that narrows in saddles before storms, a kind of glare on distant rocks that signals heat lifting, a stack of cloud shapes that means violent rain in the afternoon, even when morning is clear. The verse pairs each sign with a decision. Wait here, Move earlier, skip the high route, collect more water now. Lightning's distance can be counted in beats between flash and rumble, and that count lives as a chorus children can sing while they watch in safety, learning timing with joy so that later, when they must judge a storm's approach, the habit is already in their bones. Heat itself speaks, and the song teaches how to listen. An extra breath between lines when the air is sharp. A longer rest under certain shade trees that hold cool longer. A reminder to walk in light-colored ground where possible to lower strain. Minor injuries and ailments are remembered as verses too, not as a book of remedies, but as a stream of careful helps. A line might say, "Wash with the laugh of the creek," not its silence, meaning use moving water for cleaning a cut, and cover with the leaf that tastes like light pepper, but only if the elder nods, meaning a plant with antiseptic qualities, used under guidance and in the right context. Another rhyme might teach that smoke from a certain wood eases biting insects around camp, but must not be inhaled heavy by children. And a different cadence could remind you not to walk barefoot in a certain stretch where thorny seeds mature, unless you've already sung the line that teaches how to remove them safely with a grease made from crushed seeds that, ironically, grow nearby. These are community medicines encoded for safety and restraint, not invitations to experiment, with the important pieces guarded by those who hold that knowledge. Emergency knowledge has its own tempo, faster, purposeful, unforgettable, because it is rehearsed lightly before need. If someone is lost, the song instructs what to do. Halt singing loudly. Sing softly and steady, so your voice carries evenly. Find a height to echo your line. Make a small fire where smoke can be seen against dark rock. Leave signs at set intervals, facing the direction of expected searchers. The same symbols taught during gatherings so that rescue can read them. If a waterhole fails, the song points to the backup route strung with salt-tolerant plants and shallow pans that gather after rare showers, and the words stress sharing calculations in the group, not letting pride or shame silence the truth of how much water is left. If someone is bitten or stung, the verse repeats, "Still, bind, stay." A meter that helps still the limb, bind above and below in certain cases, and stay until help arrives, with the lines about what not to do. Cutting, sucking, sung sharp so they cannot be mistaken for good ideas in panic. The songs manage energy as carefully as they manage maps. They tell you to start moving when the air is cool and to stop before heat draws too deeply from your reserves, to eat lightly on the move and more when seated, to choose shade with light wind rather than dense cover in stillness where sweat can chill you later. They advise rotating tasks, leading, carrying, watching behind, so minds do not dull, and they incorporate praise inside the verse at small milestones, which may sound like poetry, but functions like morale fuel. You have kept the pace of the creek, your feet are clean on the stones, rest under the tree that smiles. And the group smiles too, each person feeling seen and therefore able to carry on. Caches and reciprocity are logistical songs. The line mentions where food and tools can be safely stored, high in a cleft, inside a rock that looks like a turtle, under a cut and replaced slab that seals well, and how to mark the cache without calling attention from animals or strangers. It also sets rules for using caches left by others. Take only what you need, leave a sign of what you took and why, replace when you can, and never consume the last of a water stash unless you are at the edge of safety, in which case the verse tells you how to signal that an emergency took place, so blame is not mislaid. These practices turn a hard landscape into a network of small assurances, each one kept alive by trust carried in song rather than enforced by fences. Children learn survival not as a set of grim warnings, but as a set of lively games folded into the same melodies that carry joy. They play at finding the laughing water, at identifying the sleeping kangaroo hill from different angles, at clapping out the beats of a cool burn dance, while elders correct gently and explain why today the wind says no. They are taught that asking is strength and guessing is for play, that quiet is a tool for seeing, and that singing without respect can waste a place just as surely as spilling water. By the time they are old enough to lead small stretches, the life-saving pieces are already part of their favorite songs, and the thread between delight and skill is strong. All of this works because the songs keep practical knowledge close to feeling. A line about a mother walking in heat with a child ties shade and rest to tenderness. A verse about a frog leaving the water tells you when to look for certain bush foods with a smile. A refrain about the stars turning while the stew thickens binds cooking to timekeeping. The result is a memory system that resists boredom and panic alike, that holds steady during fatigue because it is pleasant to sing, and that renews during good times because it is also celebration. Survival, in this design, is not a hard, lonely edge. It is a pattern of care, braided into travel so tightly that the hand that reaches for water also reaches for the right story, and the mouth that sings for direction also sings thank you, and the two together keep people and country well. A songline is also a fence you can hear, a threshold announced by story rather than by stakes in the ground. As the melody runs, it carries cues about where one group's responsibilities taper and another's begin, where a traveler becomes a guest, where a plant stand is to be left for those who tend it, and where a waterhole has rules that differ from the one you left behind. These boundaries are not walls, they are relationships. The verse arrives at a ridge and softens, or the rhythm changes at a creek crossing. And the change is not just topography. It is a signal to shift manners, to use certain names, to speak to certain people first, to remember that your rights behind you are not the same as your rights ahead. By encoding these shifts in the same channel as direction, the songs make law impossible to ignore without singling it out as a separate scolding voice. Stories root the border in memory, so it feels natural rather than arbitrary. A tale may tell of an ancestral being who walked to this hill and turned aside, leaving a mark that is still visible as a split boulder or a strange fold in the earth. The turn of that being becomes the turn of the root and the turn of responsibility. To step past it without asking is not only rude, but out of tune. Another story might describe how two groups met on a flat and exchanged gifts, and that flat remains a meeting place with protocols for welcome, trade, and rest that are sung whenever you approach. The narrative makes the invisible visible. You do not need a painted line, because the moment in the song that mentions the ancestor's turn or the old exchange puts the boundary right under your feet. Lore travels inside these narratives because they carry authority and joy at the same time. A verse that explains why a certain grove is a place of teaching will also say who may gather there, who must wait at the edge, and how to ask for inclusion. Another that describes a spring born from a sorrow may insist that noise be kept low, fires be small, and water be taken in an order that protects both the spring and the people who depend on it. The rules are not merely utilitarian. They are tied to meaning, so obedience feels like participation in a story rather than submission to an external force. In this way, boundaries keep shape across generations without needing guards, because everyone carries the signposts in their throats. Not all edges are hard. Many are season lines, shifting with rain and heat, negotiated through song each year so that access matches abundance. The songs anticipate this by offering alternate verses that open or close a path depending on the time. When food is fat in one country, the melody invites visitors along the agreed approach with phrases that sound like doors opening. When a drought tightens, the melody closes gently, diverting travel to tougher but safer routes and reminding guests to bring gifts or to wait. This elasticity depends on trust, and trust is maintained by scrupulous attention to the small courtesies the songs require at thresholds. Speaking certain names, standing in certain places to announce yourself, placing a token on a rock that has seen such tokens for centuries. Kinship threads through these borders, assigning who may sing what, who may marry whom, who may lead a crossing at a given spot, and who must step back. The map in sound runs parallel to the map of relationships, so that a person knows their position among people the way they know their position among hills. A section of song might only be led by someone of a particular skin name or moiety, not as a privilege, but as a balancing act that keeps responsibilities distributed. When lines from different countries interweave at a meeting ground, the order of singing mirrors the order of speaking in council. The structure of dance mirrors the structure of obligation, and the end result is that law is performed rather than merely declared. Disputes do not float free of the land, they return to it for resolution. If harm is done, the song can direct parties to a place historically used for settling such matters, where procedures, compensations, and witness roles are already woven into story. There, the verse that names the place also names the law relevant to the wrong. What rebalancing is proper, how apology is shown, how the relationship will be bound again. The landscape thus acts as a court whose rules are remembered in music, reducing the chance that anger or confusion will erase the steps. Even the path to the meeting slows in the melody, encouraging tempers to cool and reminding participants of their shared dependence on the ground they are about to stand upon. Totems and affiliations tie people to species and features, shaping both boundary and care. If your clan holds a relationship with a certain animal or plant, the song will tell you where its important places lie and what your duties are when you pass them. It might forbid you to take that species here while permitting different use elsewhere, or require you to perform a small act, clearing debris, leaving food, singing a verse as you cross. These obligations extend across borders because totem ties are not invented by convenience. They are part of a larger law that the songs acknowledge whenever a line touches the relevant sites. In this way, the boundary becomes not a line of exclusion, but a seam of cooperation, stitched by many hands and watched by many eyes. Signals of respect at edges are precise because precision prevents harm. The song will say whether to light a small fire or none at all on arrival, whether to call loudly or sing softly, whether to wait for a runner to come or to send one of your own, whether to sit or stand, and where. It will list the gifts considered proper, tools, ochres, foods in season, and the phrases that signal you come in good faith. All of it in a cadence that is hard to forget under pressure. The same melody that carries direction carries manners, and because everyone has learned it, a boundary meeting begins not with improvisation, but with a familiar exchange. Misunderstandings still happen, but the song narrows their likelihood and provides a shared basis to repair them. The land itself enforces law in practical ways the song highlights. A path that skirts a sacred hill is not the shortest, but the short way is rocky and treacherous for the unwelcome. The long way moves through soft country that rewards those who follow protocol. A waterhole that must be approached from the downstream side has safer footing there, and quicksand on the other bank. A grove used for ceremony happens also to catch the breeze that keeps biting insects away, making it a comfortable place to gather. These alignments are not magical. They are observations refined into tradition. By singing them, a community turns the environment into a partner that nudges people toward lawful behavior even when no one is watching. Boundaries keep memory tidy by preventing the confusion of lines. Each custodian group maintains clarity in their stretch, proper metaphors, correct names, the right tempo for a climb or a descent. When you pass the line, you yield to local phrasing, even if your version at home differs slightly, because fidelity to place outranks the pride of habit. This practice keeps the map from fraying into countless private variants and ensures that a traveler can count on consistency where it matters most. At ceremonial exchanges, differences are discussed, and sometimes the community agrees to adopt a change that better reflects a river's new channel or a species' shift in range. But those decisions are sung into being in public, so they cannot be mistaken for errors. Law includes care for the vulnerable along the way. The songs specify places where the old and the young should rest, where shade falls longest at midday, where firewood is plentiful for quick warmth, on cold mornings. They also specify behavioral law. Who shares water first when stores run thin? Who carries burdens when someone is injured? Who watches for signs ahead while others tend to the rear? How to rotate roles so fatigue and authority do not pool dangerously. These are boundaries within a group, soft guards against selfishness that, sung often enough, become habitual kindness. The fact that they are placed within the same memory stream as direction means that they surface exactly when needed, not as afterthoughts. Sacred restrictions are held with firmness and subtlety. A verse might glide past a sight with only a hint, a lowered voice, a shift in syllables that initiates recognize, while the general traveler hears only a change in mood and the instruction to keep to the contour. Those who carry the deeper knowledge understand why, and their behavior guards the place. Those who do not still act in ways that protect it. This layering prevents sensitive knowledge from being broadcast without leaving the site defenseless. Law here is both shield and invitation. Shield for what must be held close, invitation to learn with humility under the right guidance. Trade and exchange move along the same corridors as law, and the rules of fair dealing are inseparable from the songs that bring people together. The verses remind you to balance what you bring with what you take, to repair a damaged tool before you pass it on, to teach the use of an unfamiliar item so the gift does not become a burden. The boundaries of quality are sung too. How to tell good stone from bad, sound wood from cracked, potent ochre from weak, so that cheating is harder and trust is easier. Over time, the reliability of people at a boundary becomes part of their reputation braided into the root. The song may praise a group for generous shade and clear water, or warn softly that there were troubles here once, and that one must approach with extra care. When change presses hard from beyond the horizon, new fences, roads, laws, the songs adapt to keep law legible where it can be. A detour might be added with sober words about danger. A crossing point may become a waiting point where vehicles pass and a hand is raised in a sign agreed with neighbors. Stories evolve to include these realities without surrendering the older obligations to the land. The boundary remains a living place of negotiation rather than an erased line, and elders teach the young how to carry both the old and the new without dropping either. This is not easy, but the habit of negotiating season lines and hospitality has prepared communities to negotiate these two. Ultimately, boundaries in song are a way of saying, this is where we meet correctly. They organize movement so that land is not exhausted, so that memory remains accurate, so that relationships reduce fear rather than increase it. The stories that travel those lines make the rules memorable and the reasons felt, and the law that lives inside them keeps strength from becoming license and need from becoming theft. To walk within this framework is to feel held by more than direction. It is to hear, at each threshold, the long and careful work of those who kept the path before you, inviting you to keep it just as carefully for those who will follow. If you listen for it, you can hear cousins of these maps you can hear in many places, each tuned to local ground and sky. In the wide Pacific, navigators made the ocean speak. They learned the star paths by heart, where a bright point lifts from the horizon, how a constellation tilts and sets, and they paired that knowledge with the feel of swells striking a canoe from different angles. Long, regular waves, rolling from distant storms, carry signatures that can be read at night with eyes closed, ribs feeling the boat's small answers. Birds become verses too. The time a certain species leaves land in the morning and the distance it will fly before turning back reveal how close an unseen island must be. Cloud bottoms reflect the pale green of shallow lagoons. A high anvil speaks of storms that will shift the wind by dawn. Marshallese stick charts taught the logic of these patterns, lines for swell, shells for islands, not as luggage to carry, but as memory scaffolds until the body and the sea could converse directly. In such traditions, the star compass is not a drawing. It is a song of headings, each house of the sky called by name and practiced until turning the bow. A few finger widths feels like changing key. Far north, winter makes a pure geometry. Travelers on sea ice read the world by wind-carved ridges, sastrugi that align with prevailing gusts, and by the taste of air moving low over pressure cracks, colder and sharper than the air above smooth ice. Inuksut, stone figures placed carefully on headlands and crossings, stand like held notes, guiding someone across a wide, white staff when landmarks sleep under snow. Dog teams learn the music too, leaning into certain gates on certain surfaces, and a seasoned driver can feel from the line's pull when they are sliding off a remembered track. Stories attached to the names of points, bays, and passes, teaching not only where the safe route lies, but when to avoid it. Thin ice after a west wind, rotting edges when the tide runs strong. And those warnings remain bright because they are told as happenings, not as abstractions. Across the Andes, memory rides on stone and thread. Roads braid mountains into empire, and relay runners carry news and quipu, knotted cords that hold numbers and categories so goods and obligations can be tracked. But there is also a city-sized map in ritual. Lines radiate from a sacred center through shrines and springs, a sex system that orders both space and time. Processions along these lines refresh the ties between place, season, and duty, just as the songlines do when walked, danced, and sung. In high villages, planting calendars chant the sky, the angle of the Milky Way in certain months, the arrival of a cluster before dawn, the way frost behaves in particular gullies, all tied to when to place tubers in ground that breathes in and out with cold and sun. The melody here is work and worship at once, and the ground answers in yields when remembered rightly. In the Sahel and Savannah, pastoralists lead herds along routes that are as much sung as trodden. The songs hold the order of wells that survive late in the dry season, the etiquette at each, the diseases that move with certain rains, the grasses that fatten animals without scouring their bellies. Praise poetry for cattle folds in genetics and geography together, horn shapes linked to particular country, coat colors that fare better under harsh sun. and the rhythm matches the long pace of walking beside animals day after day. Where community memory runs deep, one can hear verses telling which families hold responsibility for a borehole, who to find when the pump sounds wrong, and which stretches must be left fallow for pasture to heal. The ethic is practical and beautiful. To move is to tend. To tend is to remember, and to remember is to sing. In the forests of Central Africa, drums talk. Their tones mirror the falls and rises of tonal speech, and messages run along ridges from village to village, telling of visitors, warnings, ceremonies, markets. While not maps in the narrow sense, these soundways turn country into a communicative field, with known hills serving as repeaters and particular clearings as switching points where a practiced ear can tell which valley answered which call. A person born to this landscape hears distance in decay, the way a note thins over swamp and thickens over dry ground, and learns to place themselves inside a network of predictable echoes. Over time, the drum paths become just as reliable as a footpath underfoot, and the village's location in Who Hears Whom sits alongside its coordinates in river bends and old trees. On North America's plains and plateaus, stories sit in places like cairns made of words. A hill where someone once told a hard truth becomes a lesson retold whenever its shape lifts on the skyline. A bend in a river, married to a cautionary tale, slows horses without anyone calling out to slow. Place names can hold whole speeches, condensed into a few syllables that trigger the longer account in the listener's mind. What happened there? What should be done now? What is owed to that ground? Pilgrimage trails to high places bind communities seasonally to roots where berries ripen, fish run, or medicine plants can be gathered, and the songs that accompany these journeys often carry rules of harvesting and rest, making sure that memory does more than admire. It behaves. Singing to remember is not only the domain of travel. Think of traditions where the land is praised by singing it, where to name is to care. In Aotearoa, chants and songs carry genealogies that link people to mountains and rivers, and the rise of a winter cluster in the east, the small lantern of Matariki, signals a turning of the year that aligns feasting, mourning, and planting. Hymns to landscapes are not just niceties. They are calendars and contracts. In the North Atlantic, work songs timed hard labor to waves and wind, oars lifting together by a shouted pattern, cloth beaten in rhythm while a watcher looked to the sky for weather signs, and the regularity kept people safe as much as it kept them in time. Scottish canterage, the sung language of piping, preserved tunes by mouth when instruments were absent, a reminder that vocables can carry precise, technical memory better than a breathless human might expect. The method of Loshai, the memory palace, shows another echo, this time architectural. Orators in the Mediterranean world learned to place ideas along a known route through a building in the imagination, so that walking past a column, a doorway, a painted wall would trigger the next piece of an argument. This is not navigation in the desert, but the principle is the same. Bind sequence to place, and place to emotion or image. and you can carry long, complex things without ink. Medieval pilgrims threaded prayers and hostels into verse, so a person could carry stages of a journey in the mouth when maps were scarce, and not everyone could read. Monastic hours chimed the day into a pattern that made time itself a path. Matins, lauds, prime, and on, work and rest, moving like feet to a beat. In the archipelagos of the north, people called landscapes by names that are also instructions. A notch in a ridge might be where the wind kisses twice, telling you to expect gusts that can topple a heavy load if you do not bow your shoulders and lean. A cove might be good belly after storm, promising a swell that will abate by morning if you shelter and wait, warning you not to push out into green water too soon. Fishermen marked routes to reefs with triangles of bearing on two headlands, sung as a line of nonsense that only made sense to those who knew which rhyme matched which cove. Here, song is code and kindness, a way to share without stripping a place of its capacity to support all who depend on it. Even the act of calling a landscape into presence through song has parallels across the circumpolar and subarctic world, where joik, joik-like, and other forms can evoke a person, an animal, or a place so strongly that listeners feel the named thing arrive. This evocation is guidance too. To sing the reindeer's winter ground is to remind everyone where not to tramp when snow is thin. To sing the lake's first light is to cue a memory of ice that looks safe and is not. The non-literal can carry the most literal safety when practiced carefully and returned to season after season. We can look to South Asia and hear joints between memory and geography in recitation that keeps not only syllables perfect, but breath patterns steady across generations. Itinerant singers hold epics that wander through named forests and rivers, and listeners, hearing the itinerary again and again, map their own life. Pilgrimages onto these routes, where to fast, where to feast, where to set down burdens, where to take them up again. Pilgrim circuits around sacred peaks align with stars and monsoons. Songs instruct when a pass is likely to open, and when the mountain asks for quiet feet. The geography inside devotion is not accidental. It is a hard-won tune that makes crowds move safely as well as reverently. In Europe's old mountain routes, herders carry tunes that tell animals where to come and where not to go. Calls that lift cleanly across a valley gather goats from ragged slopes at dusk. Whistles tuned to a specific flock teach lambs the sound of home from their first days. Over time, the land itself is partitioned by these calls. One shepherd's high ripple means our meadow. Another's descending phrase means your stream. When storms threaten, songs shorten and sharpen, and their very change tells anyone listening that weather presses and that plans should be revised. The land becomes a score read by voice and ear, and the weather writes annotations in cloud and echo. Many of these echoes arose independently because human bodies and attention share constraints. We walk at the pace of a drum. We remember images that are vivid and emotional. We need to time our efforts to cycles bigger than ourselves, and we teach best by embedding how, inside why, and both inside where. When knowledge is precious and heavy to lose, when a wrong turn costs more than inconvenience, communities evolve ways to carry it that cannot be washed off a slate or broken like a tool. Song, chant, rhythm, story, and the practice of moving through a world attentively become the safest bank for that value. There are clear differences, too, because each place demands its own grammar. A desert teaches thirst to listen. An ocean teaches balance. Ice teaches patience. Jungle teaches slope by smell and sound where sight is short. Yet the family resemblance remains, a reliance on sequence, on socially shared duties of care, on cross-checking with multiple senses, on rituals that renew accuracy, and on generosity that makes roots into relationships rather than secrets bricked up in a single mind. When we think of maps, our hands might reach for paper or a glowing screen, but beneath that habit lies an older, steadier reflex, to sing what we have seen so others can see it too, and to listen until what we have not yet seen becomes, through the mouths of those who have, a path we can follow with respect and success. Disruption arrived first as a change in rhythm. New tracks cut across old paths, fences thrown like stiff cords, where the song called for a gentle curve, strangers naming places with words that did not carry the duties hidden in the older names. Missions and the stations gathered people away from their roots, turning the long, breathing loops of movement into tight circles around a church bell or a stockyard bell, each toll a command that broke the cadence of travel. Languages were pressed flat or forbidden, and when a word is removed from daily use, the layers inside its sound, ecology, law, kinship, joke, begin to thin, even if elders hold the fullness in their chests. Ceremonies were policed or pushed out of sight, and with ceremony went the public maintenance of roots, the open checking of verses that keeps maps accurate, the welcoming and farewelling that threads communities along lines like beads. Extraction cut into places where a verse once lowered its voice. Mines opened at hills that had long been skirted. Dams drowned crossings where songs met like two hands clasping. Roads straightened swales and redirected drainage so that waterholes silted or vanished. Where fences wrapped springs, travelers learned to read padlocked gates instead of ripples and dragonflies, and the habit of asking permission, so central to law, was flipped into the humiliation of asking access from people who did not know the songs. Cattle and sheep pressured country that had been walked with careful fire, and without small, cool burns, spinifex and scrub thickened to a scale the old methods had not meant to meet, then flashed hot when lightning struck, scouring memories that rely on landmarks and shade. Removal and dispersion broke the social fabric that keeps a line in tune. Children taken far from their elders could not walk the stretches that belonged to their families, could not feel the hills under their own feet, could not make the small seasonal repairs of phrasing that knit story to present-day ground. Laws and rations made trade imbalanced, and hospitality hard to practice. Fear shrank the open gatherings where differences in versions were reconciled and the song retied. Even the simple fact of being watched on country by people who did not understand what was being done made some custodians sing softer than they should, or not at all, and a quiet verse can fade if it is never permitted to lift into public voice. Renaming layered another kind of erasure, a ridge that held 3 names for 3 angles, one for its mourning face, one for its shadowed pocket, one for the line of springs it shelters, might be flattened to a single outsider's surname on a map. With the cartographic stamp came the legal stamp, and the law of paper was wielded against the law in song, as if one were real and the other a quaint habit. Paper was light to carry, but heavy in court. Its thinness hid its power. People who had navigated by a memory palace carved in earth were told to prove connection with documents, which is like asking a melody to show you its bones before you will admit that it has a body. And yet the lines did not vanish. They ducked under, they thinned to threads, they waited. Elders carried them quiet through hard years, humming under their breath while chopping wood, stitching them into lullabies when rules forbade other forms, teaching fragments in the spaces between watchful eyes. Some knowledge went to ground, held by few, and then returned when there was air enough to breathe. Some verses migrated, following people into the margins they were pushed to, adapting to new constellations of daily life while keeping the core of law intact. Even where a stretch became impossible to walk end to end, journeys were reenacted in short teaching loops on safe country, the body remembering scale by proxy and waiting for the day it could return to full stride. Resilience found allies in unexpected places. Ranger programs grew, led by custodians who know where fire should run soft and where it must be kept out, reintroducing burns that speak the old language while answering to current pressures. Co-management arrangements put elders and scientists at the same table, each bringing their tools, satellite maps and star maps, rainfall charts and frog choruses, and where respect held, the results were good. Country breathed easier, and young people saw that the knowledge they were inheriting belonged at the front of decisions, not at the edge. Courts in some places recognized what should have been obvious, that country claims people as much as people claim country, and that continuity can live in song, practice, and relationship even when bulldozers have cut across paths. Language work rose like seedlings after rain, community-led teaching, on-country camps, night sky sessions where youths learn to read the turning, storytelling that insists on correct names, brought words back to daily use. Not a museum gloss of vocabulary, but full phrases that carry lore and affection, that tell a child to slow because the land is listening here, that praise a spring for its gift and warn it is thinner this year and must be used with care. Recording helped, but recording on its own was never enough. The life of a song is in being sung, by bodies moving through the places the song names. Where families and councils set clear cultural protocols for what could be archived and who could hear it, digital tools became good servants. They reminded, they organized, they held space for stories between trips, and then yielded to the real thing when feet hit ground. Art and performance braided memory into visibility without surrendering what must be held close. Paintings mapped routes by motif and color, teaching non-secret layers of how hills speak to water and how footprints of ancestors double as today's instruction to walk gently. Dance renewed the connections between step patterns and ground patterns, letting young legs learn the feel of short, long that would one day keep them safe on route-crossed slopes. Songs in public spaces gave back to elders the dignity of leading and gave to children the joy of seeing the old made new without needing to pry into restricted compartments. They will grow into properly later if they choose and are chosen. Where roads had severed songlines, people learned to stitch crossings, the choreography of pausing at a verge, the signage agreed with neighbors, the alternate verse that leads to an underpass or a bridge. Even in urban edges where silence is thin, small practices restored continuity, a pause to greet a remnant tree that once sat on a larger loop, a yearly walk that traces what a drain now hides, a spoken list of the old names before the new ones at a community event. These are not token gestures when they are done within law and led by those who hold responsibility. They are sutures, and sutures allow healing where tearing once seemed final. There have been harms inside revival too, and resilience is honest enough to name them and steer around. Tourism that treats sacred routes as attractions tears more than it ties. Universities that chase knowledge without consent or refuse to return what was taken become new extractors, their pits invisible but deep. Communities learn to say no, to set conditions, to create consent processes that are themselves teaching, so that those who come to help leave stronger relationships instead of thinner ones. The song of how to share is being rewritten in places, tuned to the reality of cameras and drones and hashtags, and led by the principle that control must rest with custodians, not with the loudest or richest voice in the room. Disruption also looked like weather thrown out of pattern. Droughts lengthened, floods came at odd times, fires ran hotter than before. Invasive plants and animals added verses of confusion. Resilience answered by adding layers. A new check phrase here about a tree flowering earlier. A new caution there about a creek that now muddies faster. An alternate line for seasons when wind comes from the wrong quarter. The capacity to adapt was always built into good practice. Parallel lines for wet and dry, for moonlit and dark. So the habit of revision under elder guidance simply had to work harder. When change pressed beyond old bounds, collaboration widened. Scientists brought long data and new measurements, and elders brought the deep pattern sense that turns thousands of observations into usable advice. Together, they rewrote parts of the score without changing the music, and that is a difficult, noble craft. Some loss is real and cannot be painted over. There are sites that will not be sung at again because they are gone, or because doing so would break a promise to keep certain knowledge safe when context has been stripped away. Grief is part of resilience, not its enemy. Communities hold mourning within ceremony so that sorrow does not blur edges or turn into shame, that silence is teaching. Remembering how to grieve well is itself a survival skill, one that allows love to keep working as a form of law, reminding people why patience is strength and why stubbornness without listening is a mistake. The strongest proof that resilience is more than a slogan is the sound of young voices picking up verses where elders breathe and smile. In many places, you can watch a teenager lead a short stretch, while a grandparent watches the horizon and nods at each correct turn of phrase. You can see small hands learning to strip bark the right way to leave the tree alive. You can hear laughter ripple when a star path that was once confusing suddenly clicks for someone who will, one day, explain it to someone else with the same grin. The path from ancestor to tomorrow is not a straight line, but a living braid. And though it has been frayed and knotted and pulled hard, it still holds. Resilience is not a return to a frozen past. It is the ongoing capacity to keep law legible and care effective under new pressures without breaking obligations to country or to each other. It looks like elders choosing when to speak and when to keep silence, like councils designing programs where work pays and pride grows, like artists reanimating knowledge in forms that travel safely, like lawyers and rangers and teachers doing their jobs under the guidance of those who carry authority given by place. It looks like a community that can say to a child, "When you sing this line, the land will answer, because it has been waiting to hear you," and then make that promise true by walking together, slowly, until the country's old, patient voice responds. Listening today begins with slowing down enough to notice that place is already speaking. You can practice without pretending to know what you do not know. Walk a familiar route with your ears open and your phone in your pocket, and pay attention to the sequence of small sounds that always arrives in the same order. A gate latch, a high wire hum, a pair of steps on a metal grate, a breeze through one tree that has a different voice from its neighbor. Turn that sequence into a soft tune as you go, not to replace any tradition, but to train your attention to hold place in memory the way good songlines do, with rhythm, with order, and with care. Over time, the melody will tell you when something is off. A missing bird at dawn, a stream running thin. And that sensitivity is the first layer of listening worth keeping. Learning respectfully means finding the custodians of the country you live on and asking how they want others to listen. Sometimes that will mean attending public talks or walks led by people who hold authority to teach. Sometimes it will mean reading guides written by local councils under elders' direction. Sometimes it will mean quietly supporting cultural programs without asking for access to things that are not yours to hear. Names matter. Learning to pronounce a place name correctly is a small act with large ripples, because the name carries story even when you do not know all of it. If a community offers a pronunciation guide or a map of names approved for public use, practicing those is a way of making your footsteps lighter. Modern tools can help if they serve attention rather than steal it. A phone can record the order of sounds on your street so you can practice a memory run at home, but it should not become the only way you know the route. Maps can mark sites where public story is told, but the point is to go and listen, not to collect digital pins. Audio walks designed by local artists and elders, when made with consent and boundaries, can let newcomers hear layers that concrete hides, and they are best treated as invitations to keep listening beyond the track, not as a box checked. The test is whether the tool makes you more present to the land and to the people who belong to it, or more insulated from both. Care is a present tense verb, and listening becomes care when it changes behavior. If the song of a park at dusk always includes bats, adjust your dog's walk so that the animals can feed undisturbed. If a creek's voice is choked by litter, join the group that clears it with the same steadiness you would use to learn a verse. If a path crosses a place that local law asks you to bypass, take the long way and treat the detour as part of the tune. Where public guidelines say to stay on marked tracks because erosion bites quickly, hear that as a chorus that keeps the ground healthy for many feet, not as a rule for other people. Listening well includes supporting the people who keep old knowledge in working order. That can look like showing up when a community-led burn needs hands under ranger guidance, like paying artists properly for cultural maps and performances, like amplifying the voices of elders when policy is made about water, fire, and land use. It also looks like restraint, declining invitations that feel wrong, refusing to share restricted content even when you stumble across it, and redirecting well-meaning friends toward appropriate channels. The hardest part of listening may be accepting that "not for you" is a generous answer, because it keeps the thing you admire intact. Cities are not silent exceptions. They have their own layered songs, and listening can make them gentler. A route to work becomes easier to remember and safer to travel when you notice the sequence of crosswalk signals and the way traffic noise shifts at certain hours. You can map pockets of calm, the way travelers map waterholes, library steps at mid-morning, a courtyard after lunch, a creek behind a warehouse on windy days. And you can share those with neighbors the way a traveler would share a good campsite, with respect and with the understanding that too much attention can wear a place thin. Urban trees and small wetlands host cycles just as strict as any desert, and hearing those cycles helps you time your care. No pruning when nests are new, no trampling when reeds are seeding, no lights left blazing where night creatures hunt. Education can braid listening into how children move through school days. Instead of teaching local geography only from a wall map, teachers can take students outside to build a small, ethical, auditory path around the campus, marking the order of sounds and the safe ways to move between them, inviting local custodians to share what is appropriate, and framing everything as practice in attention rather than as ownership of knowledge. A class can adopt a nearby creek for long-term observation, singing a simple verse that lists the insects they see in spring, the birds in summer, the changes in water pace after rain, so that by the end of a year, the children carry a small, correct song of that place and feel responsible for its health. Listening today also means making space for the sky to teach. In neighborhoods bright with artificial light, You can still learn the arcs of a few stars from a park on clear nights, timing your walk by how a pattern climbs over a roofline and dips behind a tree. If you dim lights at home and in your yard, you give that map back to yourself and your neighbors. Families can create gentle rituals, a short look up after dinner, a whispered note of where the dusty river of the Milky Way sits in winter, a child's drawing of the sky path taped to a fridge, not to mimic anyone else's sacred practice, but to recover the habit of letting something larger than our schedules set a tempo. There are ways to turn listening into mapping that honors privacy and place. Community groups can co-create public care maps that highlight places where extra attention helps. Litter traps, heat pockets in summer, wind tunnels in winter. Without pointing at sensitive sites, musicians can collaborate with custodians to make works that invite an audience into better habits. Songs that slow a listener near a wetland, that mute near a gravesite, that brighten on a shared ground where welcome has been offered. Architects and planners can design routes whose shapes teach good movement, curves that follow water, shade aligned with afternoon heat, benches placed where stories may be told, so the built world itself hums the right cues. Listening includes the courage to correct ourselves. If you learn that a favorite walk crosses a place that elders have asked people to avoid, change course and let friends know. If you have been using a name that erases older names, practice the change and expect your mouth to stumble for a while. If you have been telling a story that is not yours to tell, stop and replace speech with action where invited. This is not performative guilt. It is rhythm adjustment, the same kind a traveler makes when a dune shifts or a creek cuts a new channel, done without drama, so the song remains true. Personal practice can be quiet and small. Choose a path you walk often and give each landmark a private cue that helps you see it without scouring it. A two-note hum for a pair of leaning trees, a long syllable for the stretch where your stride lengthens, a whispered word for a corner that always holds cool. Count your steps, not to make a sport of efficiency, but to feel distance as time spent with a place. And let your counting soften the day's noise. If you wear headphones, sometimes leave one ear open so that you can hear when the land speaks louder than your playlist. If you keep a journal, note the order of sounds as you heard them. You will be surprised months later at how easily a path returns when you read back the sequence. Listening today is also legal and political because law shapes who gets to listen where and how. Support efforts that return stewardship to people who have kept it, and listen to their priorities when they say a river needs room, or a fire needs to be cooler, or a tourist track needs to rest. Advocate for dark sky protections so the shared night map can reappear. For sound refuges where construction pauses during breeding seasons. For water allocations that leave enough for the more than human chorus to continue. Policy at its best is a large public song about how to behave, and ordinary citizens can help choose its key. In workplaces, listening can guide design in ways that reduce harm. A mine plan that respects a publicly documented ceremony site is better than one that bulldozes it, but a plan that is co-designed under free, prior, and informed consent with custodians, and that leaves the site untouched with a protective buffer and an alternate access route is better still. Energy projects can map bird paths and bat feeding grounds and adjust turbine placement or timing accordingly. Tourism operators can set their rhythms by local calendars rather than by generic peak seasons. Farmers can use wind and insect songs to target work so that fields host more life without yielding less. For people far from their homelands, listening can build belonging without erasure. Migrants can create gentle family roots in new cities, walks to markets, parks, libraries, tied to recipes, phone calls home, and community gatherings, turning streets into lifelines rather than temporary corridors. Elders in diaspora can sing familiar sky patterns when they appear and pair them with new horizon shapes, helping grandchildren stitch together old and new without feeling they must choose. This is not appropriation. It is continuity in exile, respectful of local law and tuned to the neighborhoods that shelter it. Scholars and scientists can expand listening by meeting traditional knowledge on its own terms. When a fire ecologist sits with an elder and hears about a small wind that turns at a certain hour in a certain saddle, the right response is not skepticism, but curiosity and a plan to observe it together. When long-term data confirm what story has said for generations, that a river breeds certain fish best when its flood pulse comes in a particular sequence, policy should adopt that rhythm rather than forcing the river to meet a hydro schedule set in a boardroom. Collaboration becomes real when the song and the spreadsheet agree on what to do next, and when either one, standing alone, is enough to make a case. Listening shifts the way we mark time. Instead of remembering only appointments and deadlines, a year becomes a braid of sounds and paths. The month when bees start to thicken the air around a certain hedge, the week when dawn birdsong is strongest, the few nights when a chorus of frogs makes the creek's banks feel alive, the day when dry leaves first skitter loudly across a plaza. Planning around these markers makes life feel less like a calendar fight and more like keeping company, and the effect on stress is not subtle when practiced patiently. There is also room for play, because play keeps attention light and steady. Families can invent call and response games tied to safe public routes. One person names a landmark in a silly metaphor, and the other answers with the next in the chain, and share laughter when someone jumps ahead and has to find their way back. Friends can try quiet races, where the winner is the one who can walk a stretch while noticing the most changes since last time, and who can sing them softly in order at the end. These games are not trivial. They are how habits take root without feeling like chores. Listen long enough and humility becomes comfortable. You will feel how much you do not know and how often the land and its people have more to say than you can take in at once. You will also find that some of what you learn resists words, a softness in the air before rain, a way a street's noise tucks itself into a wall at certain hours, a quiet that means stay a moment when you had planned to hurry. Let those be parts of your tune, too, the rests that give shape to the notes. If you keep moving gently, asking where appropriate, supporting those who lead, and tuning your days to what your feet and ears discover, the world becomes easier to remember. And more importantly, easier to care for, because you have invited it to speak and promised to keep listening. Thank you for listening and drifting along these maps you can hear. If any part of tonight's journey stayed with you, share a thought or a place it reminded you of in the comments, always with respect for the custodians of those lands. If you'd like more calm explorations like this, tap subscribe and keep the bell gentle. Now settle your breath, let the last notes fade, and carry the softest line of the song with you into sleep. Good night.